the seed. Heartbeats blend with oceans roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shells and sand beneath my toes, tides reveal what ebb and flows. In the quiet still I hear whispered longings crystal clear. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with oceans roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shows a mirror, soul's desire, burning with a holy fire. Depth of love beyond all dreams, in the vastness it redeems.
All right. I think I'm unmuted even as we're starting off here. Okay, good. I was sorry. I'm so glad to be back to having time to start making content again. I am just really excited about getting to do this. I have missed it. I have missed you all. And I can't think of a better episode and better friends to kick off getting back into the rhythm with than Spencer and Phil, two of my absolute favorite friends and collab partners. We have the best time and cover the best topics. So first, we're going to start off. Phil and Spencer, just introduce yourselves to anybody who might not know who you are, and then we'll jump into our topic and have some real fun with this one. So, Phil.
That's a good tagline. We have the best time and we cover the best topics.
I like that.
Yeah. Hey, my name's Phil Bray. I'm currently in my garage full of boxes and I cannot move. So if I suddenly cramp up and scream, you'll know why, because I literally can't move. And I've lost my mic stand. So anyway, we're here. We're moving house. It's 5:15 in the morning here in Sydney, Australia. I have a YouTube channel, Leviticus is Fun, and I wrote a book called Leviticus on the Butcher's Block. So this conversation is going to be right up my alley, talking about skinning and animals and all kinds of fun stuff.
All right, there we go. Had to turn off my mute. And I am Spencer. I am a licensed psychotherapist who works out of Colorado Springs, and I work primarily with trauma and anxiety and depression, but I kind of subspecialize in spiritual trauma and religious abuse. And that is something that, to support that endeavor, I started up a podcast called the Trauma Informed Church Kid, kind of looking at deconstruction and trying to help people see God in a slightly different light if they're going through that journey of recovery from spiritual trauma. So that's what I do, and that's why I'm here.
All right. I just noticed, actually, Spencer, I was just looking at your background, and you've got one of these things is not like the others back there. Something is out.
Yes, I got my little Paddington figure, and then also my Boromir. So a good friend of mine, the guy who was my roommate in college, best man in my wedding, etc. He 3D printed this for me. So,
that's amazing.
Little bit dark, but I can't help but do it. So,
I saw that one in a couple of your last streams that you've done.
Yes,
I was just
yes.
mostly commenting on that we have a non-Lord of the Rings participant back there.
Yes, yes. Yes.
That's funny. I love it.
I'm a big fan of Paddington. Actually, fun fact, the way that my wife told me that she was pregnant was with a Paddington book. She, gave me a little present that was that was wrapped up, and it had a little, board book of Paddington in it. And I had grown up loving Paddington, the Paddington books, and there's something. I've been an Anglophile for, I kid you not, my entire life, and this is a great example of it. I have no idea how my parents came across Paddington first, but I grew up reading those books and really enjoyed them, and just found the sophistication so entrancing. And so my wife knew that, and that's how she chose to tell me that she was pregnant, was, give me a board book of Paddington's. And I was like, oh, thanks. She's like, oh, this is from your future son or daughter. And of course, then I just lost it. So yeah, Paddington has a special place in my heart for a lot of reasons. So
that right there is a perfect example of economia. We make an accommodation for Paddington in the Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. It's all British.
I love it. All right. As much fun it is talking about Spencer's obsession with the Lord of the Rings, that's not exactly why we're here. Okay. Why are we here? Let's talk about that, because I, in the process of my thesis writing, I stumbled across something that had a question that had been bothering me for a very long time as a Protestant, that I could not work out in a way that made any sense, that actually wasn't something that wasn't complicated, messy, and not actually giving me good answers to anything other than bad theology. So when I got to talk about it in my thesis work, and I was like, oh, I just think this is something that I would never have thought of. So we are going to talk about Genesis 3:21 and the garments of skin that God gives them at the fall. What are those? What is happening there? And really dig into some things that for me was a lot of surprise, and also in a good way. And I think there was a whole lot of healing theology that, now that being in the Orthodox Church, has become a very healing way to look at that, a very holistic way to look at that. And so it's like, let's just kind of talk about that, because the Orthodox don't own this. This comes out of the book of Genesis, which is where we get it from. So it isn't our exclusive property. So I thought, this would be a great one. And I know Spencer would be interested in talking about this, because this gets into a lot of his hobby horses of why we need better theology and just church trauma and church hurt work. And Phil is, this is a perfect topic for him. So I invited both of them to come relaunch my channel and talk about something that might be new to some people and might make a few people a little cranky, because that's not the way I learned it growing up, and that's okay, because we're here to talk about that. So
can I say that
yes,
as we were sharing resources, I thought I'd spent a bit of time studying this, but you said surprising. There was so much surprising stuff that I just had no idea about. And it just goes so deep. Like some of the stuff that you guys shared, I was reading it and making like audible noises. I'm like, really? Like, and we just have no idea. So yeah, looking forward to an exciting, that's going to be great.
Right. So Spencer, before we were jumping in, I really am curious about your thoughts, because this, I know, is a big thing that you like to circle around and address sometimes. So initial thoughts.
Yeah. Just going from my own history, like having grown up as a Protestant, the way that I was always taught this passage was that God had to kill an animal to be able to basically not kill them. Like he had promised them, on the day you eat of it, you will die. And they didn't die. And I was always taught the reason why they didn't die is because God killed an animal instead. And so that was kind of like the proto-sacrifice, the sacrifice, so to speak. And of course, then that became part of the interpretation of Cain and Abel's offering, et cetera, et cetera. But there was never any kind of connection that was ever drawn between like the actual garment part. Or, I mean, insofar as there ever was, it was purely on the literal level. It was just simply surface of like, he's just covering them up. Like they tried to cover themselves up with fig leaves and he's just kind of doing the job the rest of the way. I did hear a little bit of some symbolic reading, but it was through a very kind of, I'd say, grace versus works lens. It's not quite Calvinist, but it's definitely a grace versus works lens that the fig leaf was their attempt to cover themselves up and deal with their sin. But it only just does the bare minimum and doesn't really do the job. Whereas God's attempt to cover them up to deal with their sin covers them fully and of course that was then tied to an understanding of atonement and blood as being a covering. Never mind the fact that we don't see blood in Genesis 3:21. But nevertheless, that just was kind of, pushed aside as like, yeah, some things are different, but the main point is still there. So that's just kind of been my history with that passage. And it wasn't until I started working on my podcast, and I mean, it was literally that far along. Like I was 42, I think 41, something like that, when I started working on my podcast and putting together some content for Genesis in the early chapters, that I started realizing, there are other ways to look at this and other ways of understanding it. So yeah, that's kind of been my experience with that.
Yeah, I grew up in a context that believed in what we call inherited guilt and believed in this this whole idea that those are reminders of shame and that we are permanently covered in this shame. And so this was very, very healing for me when I was dealing with this in my thesis work and the ties to the incarnation. And it's just absolutely amazing. So I want to just kind of jump right in because we're going to start the way we do around here all the time with the narrative. We're going to start with the story, and I'm going to start this in Genesis, and we're going to start Genesis 2:15. So we're going to back up from chapter 3 a little bit and just speed through because this is a story that we're all very familiar with. We've had it in Sunday school since some of us were not even old enough to crawl. So this is a real familiar piece, but just kind of you're getting into creation, and God looks at he creates man and puts him in the garden and says, you can eat from everything in here, and he says, it's not good for you to be alone. I'm going to make him a helper. And then out of the ground, all the wild animals of the field and all the birds of heaven, and brought Adam to see them and to see what they would be called. And it's just amazing to me. It's just this, we look at this scope of Adam is seeing the scope of creation and seeing how beautiful it is. But he hasn't, a suitable match for him hasn't been found. And and this is where it gets really fun because when you dive into the Hebrew here in this next part, it says God, in some versions, it says God brought a trance upon Adam and he slept. That's prophetic vision language. So yeah, did he physically fall asleep? Probably, but it isn't actually defining it wasn't the anesthesiologist showed up and knocked him out and then God did some surgery and pulled out a piece of bone and then here we go. Like that's a very Western reading of Spencer is dying to say something here.
I don't want to derail the narrative, and I know it is later in the canonical narrative, but I can't help but hear that and think of Abraham going into a deep sleep. And I'm not sure if the Hebrew word is the same, but Abraham, when the covenant was cut with him. And so, which of course, what's about to happen between Adam and Eve is also a covenant. It's not described as a berit in Genesis 1 and 2, but it is described in covenantal terms throughout the rest of the Bible. So anyway,
taking away apart is a covenantal thing, circumcision.
Yes.
Removing a part
Yes.
of the flesh.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Taking things that are together, splitting
Mhm.
them apart so that you
Mhm.
can then bring them back together. Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, very much.
And just another word on this prophetic. It's a thought idea in Hebrew. It's not necessarily anchored to a specific verb or verb tense. It's a thought idea. But it's the same expression that is Isaiah and his vision in chapter 6, and Ezekiel and his vision in chapter 1, and like this is with Daniel and all of his vision. Like this is what is happening when you see prophetic visions. Like there's even, I can't remember where it is. We talked about this in prophets class, where I think it's Daniel, where he's talking about having a vision in his sleep, having a vision. Like, is he asleep? Is he awake? Yes, no, yes, no. Like it's really crazy, because the whole point is you're transported out of the reality that you're in. Whether you're asleep or not is not really relevant. It's just the fact that you're in a different space. And so what's kind of going on here in this language in Genesis 2, and Adam falling asleep, yeah, he probably was, because because of what happens in the vision and all of this is probably the case. But in this prophetic vision language, Adam is watching himself be torn in half. I mean, it literally is this idea of drawn and quartered language of the Middle Ages, where they used to do gross things like that to people. But it's that God is just ripping Adam in half, and then out of those two halves, the whole forms of the halves. So now you have two wholes out of two halves, and that's the prophetic language. That's kind of the picture that's going on here. And it unfortunately, in the way that modern philology and translation works, gets boiled down and reduced to its most reductive, flattened form, to say an anesthesia showed up and God pulled out a rib. And so that it just strips it of the vision and the full imagery that's happening there. So we kind of have to keep that in our heads for the rest of this story, because it kind of matters that this is one that's been ripped in half and made complete but incomplete. This is the fun thing about Hebrew too, because you have this idea of completeness. So Adam and Eve are completed as individuals, but they're not complete unless they're together. Right? So they're complete but incomplete. And when they're together, then their complete is complete. I mean, it's hard to explain. Hebrew's weird. So
but that's how covenant works. Like with covenant with Abraham, it's the separating, or the covenant of pieces. But the idea is that the pieces were separated. But the idea is that as one becoming one. So you'd walk down the center of the separated pieces, and it's like, if you break this oath, or if you break this covenant, it's like you've separated something that had become one, had become unified. So then when you think about a marriage covenant, it's even more special, because it's literally like something that is now complete, as you're saying. It's like the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think it's really important too the church fathers talk about this a lot, but there is in this language, and in the place where you see them in the garden, and that is Eden. And we don't have time beyond the scope of arguing if Eden was real or just figurative, or what's going on there with Eden, because there's a lot you could get into arguing that itself. But it is a place that is meant to be, creation in Eden is called very good, not perfect, because it is supposed to mature with Adam and Eve. So, but the fact that it's there, creation is very good. It means everything there is very good. And it is created with this innocence. It is a full state of unguarded connection. There's no need for boundaries. There's no need concealment. There's no need to hide from God or from each other, because we are in this complete state of innocence, right? And that is referred to. There's this amazing book. Let me see if I can find it. Yes. This amazing book right here. If you haven't read this, get this and read this. Gary Anderson, The Genesis of Perfection. I sent this to you guys a while ago. This book is amazing. Absolutely. And he spends a whole chapter on this garments of light thing. He spends several more chapters on Eden and how all of that works in the temple and the tabernacle. And it's just probably one of the 3 best books out of the 120 that I read for my thesis. Is one of the 3 best books that I read. Like, it's amazing. Changed my view on a lot of stuff. Highly, highly, highly recommend it. If you can get your hands on it, get your hands on it. It's a great book. And a lot of this is sourced out of here and out of his sources and stuff. But it's just like, so we get, so what, and so what I also want to clarify. So, and we're talking about this language of garments of light and garments of skin. There are some people who might think like, okay, so are you saying when you get these garments of skin, like at what point do we get a human body? So we're not saying that we're separating this idea of person from body, because that's Gnosticism, and we don't do that around here. So all of this is holistic and integrated. So we also need to keep that in our minds in this language, especially when we get into 321 specifically and talk about these garments of skin that are given to Adam and Eve. We're not Gnostics, and we're not talking about giving a physical body or any of that kind of stuff. We're just we're not going to go there. Okay.
Or originist. Yes.
Right. And just a quick side note too that I want to throw in here just for fun, because I can, and it's my channel. This definitely ties into this concept that the incarnation was plan A from the beginning. So if we are created in a state of very, very good, but not yet perfected, how do we get to perfection? That's through maturing in wisdom. How do we do that? Through the incarnation and walking with Christ. And so a lot of Protestants are going to be, but you can't have Jesus in the Old Testament. That's an argument beyond the scope that we will do a whole entire episode on. Trust me. It's on my list. We are going to address this whole time traveling Jesus confusion.
Let me guess. Courtney is going to come on.
I don't know. Spencer, how many months did we go around and around about the time traveling Jesus thing?
Yes. Yeah, you're right.
This was a hard knot for me to untangle. So
Yeah.
we will go and get into that.
Jesus in the TARDIS. Yeah.
That's right. Jesus in his TARDIS. Yes, that was fun. Oh my goodness. That's good, going back a ways. But anyway, this idea that the incarnation is the thing that brings us to full perfection. And this is plan A from the beginning. Because a lot of people have this idea that the fall and Adam and Eve, you wouldn't explain it this way, and they wouldn't explain it this way. But now that I don't believe that and think that way anymore, I look back at this and I'm like, and it's like somehow the fall, it's like, okay, now we've got a situation on our hands, and God's got to call AAA to come do some side of rescue because Adam and Eve like veered off, and all of a sudden I got to come up with a plan B because, like it's an emergency, like we got to, like kind of thing. That's not really the case. That this just, we are always on the path towards full maturity and perfection, being reunited with God. We just have to. This is where Spencer, we get the Lord of the Rings imagery, and Gimli in that. And I love the way he talks about that. And I think it's the second one, talking about it's the first one, the long way around, because they're debating. Do they go through the mines of Moria? They're on Caladros, and everybody's going to freeze to death. And he starts talking about, we got to take the long way around. Well, that's what the fall did. We're still in plan A. We're just taking the very long way around through the dirt, the mess, the sin, the death, the yucky parts, because we keep choosing to take the long way. So that's kind of the whole idea I wanted to lean into. If you guys had any brief thoughts on that before we jump into 321 here.
I do, but Phil.
Yes.
Okay.
No, go for it.
I was just thinking about this in terms of being a father and parenting, and how I'm like, there are so many times where, I love my daughter dearly. She is almost 9 years old. She is a very strong-willed, very forceful and firecracker of a girl, and she has a very clear idea of the way things ought to be. And she wants them to be a certain way, and her way in particular. And I don't mean that like in any kind of negative sense. It's just a fact. And there have been so many times where I will tell her, okay, look, there's a better way to do this. You can do it this way. You can, what if you tried this? And it's just, no, like I want to do it this way. And please hear me. I'm not going Vadi Bakum and saying that, this is just like, childish sinfulness and stuff like that. I'm not trying to equate those two at all. But I am saying that it certainly does make her take the long way around, for sure, for a ton of just very simple tasks. And that's where like very simple, very easy tasks take absolutely forever sometimes, with a lot of frustration and a lot of pain and a lot of annoyance in the middle. And honestly, if she would just trust me that I do know better and follow along with my commandments, it would go a lot better for her. But sometimes she has to see that for herself.
I think that's the terrible burden of free will, because we get into this we're not going to, again, beyond the scope, we're not going to get into that. But there is, you're like, free will, woohoo, I get to do whatever I want. Yes, you do. But there are some realities to the fact that free will and using to get to make your own choices might not always end the way you think it might. So, and that's exactly kind of what's going on here. That's exactly what's going on here. Not kind of, it's exactly what's going on here. You get to Genesis 3, and I want to also push back on this idea, because I heard this so much growing up in my Protestant days, like this debate, and everybody kind of just assumes that the tree of knowledge of good and evil was put there as some sort of pass-fail litmus test, that they were set up to fail. Like God set them up to fail because the fall happened. So they had no other choice, but they had to eat from that fruit. And so the fall, like God set this whole thing in motion. Yeah. And I'm like, I actually heard a sermon more than once, but one that sticks out in my mind, that the tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil, was set up as, he didn't phrase it this way, but as an antitype of the cross, because the cross had to happen. So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil had to be there so they would fail, so that the cross could happen. And I was like, this doesn't sound right to me at all. Like this sounds, it's just, I was still very much a Protestant at that point, but I was just like alarms going off in my head going, there's something very, very wrong with that idea. And it just, so no, the knowledge of the tree of good and evil is the end of the maturation process, when they are mature enough to hold the knowledge of the weight of their consequences, of the choices that they make in tension, without the disaster that we see in people's lives now. That's what happens when you try to get over your skis and make a choice you're not mature enough for. And we've all made them. Every single person on this panel here could give you a very long list, if they were honest, about the choices that we've made that, boy, why didn't I listen to my dad? Like that kind of thing, right?
Yep.
And so this is not God setting up an impossible pass-fail standards for people, expecting them to fail. God doesn't have some sort of a, like, I don't know, what is it that where doctors and nurses like kill people long enough to revive them, this hero complex? Like, this is not what's going on here. So if this wasn't in the plan, but Spencer, can you talk about that for just a second? Because this is very harmful to theology and to how we interact with each other.
I think you're thinking of Munchausen syndrome.
That's it. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that is something that I talk about in my podcast in season 1, when I was doing the episode is called "A Serpent and Two Trees," and so I was talking about what the role of the serpent was in the story, what the role of the two trees were in the story, and I just went back to Theophilus of Antioch. But what he was saying was the same thing as like Irenaeus in the 2nd century was saying too. So I'm just going to go ahead and quote Theophilus. He said, the tree of knowledge itself was good, and its fruit was good because it was made by God. And like, that's the thing that we don't think about sometimes. We go, oh yeah, there's a tree of knowledge, like it must be a bad thing. So they have to, it's like, no, it was good because it was created by God, and that's all God creates is good. Anyway, continuing with Theophilus. For it was not the tree, as some think, but the disobedience which had death in it. And so this kind of takes out the whole idea of like a magic tree. it was not the tree itself, but it was just the act of disobedience that had the death in it. Back to Theophilus. For there was nothing else in the fruit than only knowledge. But knowledge is good when one uses it discreetly. But Adam,
Mhm.
being yet immature, was on this account as yet unable to receive knowledge worthily. For now, also, when a child is born, it is not at once able to eat bread, but is nourished first with milk, and then, with the increment of years, it advances to solid food. Thus, too, it would have been with Adam. For not as one who grudged him, as some suppose, did God command him not to eat of knowledge. And I mean, I haven't heard this in my Protestant upbringing, but I have heard this in like, skeptical debates, whether they're coming from, atheists online or whether they're coming from people who are kind of captivated and captured by the skeptical scholarship and looking for some kind of Miltonian subplot about, what was really going on in the garden and those kind of things. But it's the whole idea of that tree being there is not there to impugn the character of God. It's not there to say that like God's saying, well, I knew that they would be like me if they ate it. And so I put them a test to see if they wanted to be like me. And turns out they didn't. Now I got to punish them. It's much more like, no, he wants them to become like him.
Mhm.
That's actually the whole goal. That's the whole point of it. Like that's that going from good to very good to perfect or perfected or complete or whatever. Um, but he wants them to do it in the proper sequence, at the proper pace, in the proper way, at the proper time. And he dictates when that happens. But they decide, no, I think I know better. I think I can do it my way. And that I think there's a good reason why Theophilus went to an analogy of a child there, because that's very
Right.
childish and childlike kind of behavior. So
And I think it comes from the trouble with translation, in that Hebrew word "ra" doesn't always necessitate moral
right,
corruption. It's
right.
not always evil in the way that we understand it. So how
Mhm.
can you have a tree of good and evil? But if you only understand evil as moral corruption and what we would consider really evil, black ickiness, that in itself is a tension that you can't, like, how do you reconcile that God puts evil in paradise, like, in Eden, like that? But
Yeah.
that's not the original intent of Ra. Was not intended with moral corruption. That's what happens after the fall. And so we got a whole lot of things that are dragged into the muck with this happening. So let's jump into that. So we've got man, we've got woman, we've got all of that going on now. And we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but again, for the story, the snake shows up and deceives Eve, and she gives the fruit to Adam, and he deliberately makes the choice to rebel, which is a whole nother conversation for another day, beyond the scope. That's my new favorite phrase. So it's going to get overused for a little while, but then God's like shows up and calls out to them, "Where are you? I heard you talking in the garden." Like, God's looking for them because he
Mhm.
walks with them, and he's like, so this is where we're going to beyond the scope again. In the incarnation shows up. This is where the incarnation shows up in Genesis 3, and Christophanies, and we'll talk about that another day. But he's like, and Adam finally answers him. It's like, well, I heard you, and I hid because I was naked. God's like, well, how did you know that? Who told you that? Did you eat from the tree? And it's not like, well, God doesn't know that because God's God and he knows. But so then you have this conversation, and you get into the everybody's blaming everybody else and the curses and all that stuff. And this brings us to, which I really, and I find this interesting, and I meant to put it in the outline, but I forgot because it was like 1:00 in the morning when I did that. So, but you got this whole thing. You get this arguing over who did what and whose fault it is, and God says, you get the curses of the ground, and then 21 or 20. So Adam called his wife's name life because she was the mother of all living, which I was like, that's a very interesting and weird thing to do after you were just trying to blame your wife for getting you into all of this trouble that's going to get you in big trouble with God. And then you name her the mother of all life. And it's just like, that's interesting. Like, I love that right there.
Yeah.
And then you get to 21, the whole reason why we're here. And also for Adam and his wife, the Lord God made garments of skin and clothed them. And that's where we're going to kind of rest there. And we're just, because then you get into the struggles of parenting start right like 3 verses later. So we're not going to dive into all of that fun in here. We're just going to park in 321. So this is where we get the whole origin of this whole garments of skin mystery. What are these garments of skin? What are their purpose? What do they do? Why are they there? And what is happening with this? So the first thing I want to point out is that in here, because a lot of people in this, you hear this bringing in Spencer, I think you were talking about this idea that an animal's killed and then this clothes are made from these skin and they're given because they try to make fig leaves for themselves, and that was too embarrassing. So God gives them better clothes and, does this by killing an animal. So the very first thing I want to say in response to that is nowhere in this verse is it recorded that an animal dies. There is not one word of animal death in this sentence anywhere. That doesn't mean it didn't happen,
or any conceptual hints for that matter.
Right. There's nothing. It just said God made garments of skin. And a lot of people, I think, in our Western minds think, well, if God made garments of skin, they had to come from somewhere. So how does that work? So this is where I want Phil to jump in because I think this would be a great place for him to jump in.
Well, I was going to say, like, that's exactly what I've heard growing up. Yeah. Something had to die is the line that I keep hearing. Like, because of Adam and Eve's sin, something had to die. And so God was showing them what death looks like, which I just assumed was true.
Yeah.
And people then say that that's a sacrifice, because obviously if there's a death, then it's a sacrifice, right? Isn't that the definition of sacrifice? No, it's not. Quickly, while we're on story, this probably wasn't in the plan either, but the parallel of Adam and Eve and the garments of skin and Cain is super cool. So I'm just going to read from something I wrote a little bit ago. So story of Cain and Abel kind of mirrors the story. Actually, every story in Genesis almost mirrors the story of Adam and Eve, but Cain and Abel definitely. So Adam and Eve, they fail. They make a poor decision that leads to death. And they hide themselves from God. They hear God's voice. They respond to God poorly. Then the ground is cursed and they are exiled from the place of God's presence. And so the pattern that Cain follows is he makes a bad decision, which leads to death of Abel. He hides himself, or he's hidden from God's face. He speaks with God and he responds poorly. And then the result is being cursed. Cain is cursed from the ground and he's sent away or exiled from the presence of God. So you notice those parallels, and then you notice another mirror, which is Cain is given a mark of protection before he's exiled. So then if you think back to the Adam and Eve story, what happens before they're exiled? They're given garments of skin. So one possibility is that it's a mark of protection, which we're going to talk a lot about.
Yeah.
I think that there's there because you assume the death of an animal, which isn't recorded, And both of you are much more like schooled in some of the sacrificial language and atonement arguments than I am. I mean, I can put together a decent argument, but you two are much more further down the road of putting all that together than I am, because that's not been my focus. But there is absolutely zero sacrificial language in this narrative here, in this chunk of Genesis 3:20, even 16 to 23. Like, there is zero sacrificial language in there. Nothing you can tie to Leviticus in there.
But I've got a commentary at home that says that it was a sacrifice.
I am going to call that out as saying, throw that away, because
yeah.
Throw it out.
Well, so a couple of different features that are ubiquitous within sacrifice that is not present here. Burning and blood being the two big ones. Like those, every single sacrifice has those two elements, or every single thing that is conceived of as a sacrifice has those two elements. And where it doesn't have burning, it has some kind of, burning like thing, like incense, with a coal. Or where it doesn't have blood, it has some kind of atoning function, like incense, like the cloud of incense that covers and or purifies. So like there is always that kind of feature of sacrifice. But then the other key thing, so we have the absence of those two things. And I should say that, like, whenever I say burning of blood, I mean animal sacrifices, because that's what we're talking about here. I mean, obviously there isn't blood with a grain offering or something like that. But anyway, setting that aside, whenever the other thing to consider is that the skin of the animal was barely relevant. Like, actually wasn't relevant at all in the context of the sacrificial ritual. The skin so the animal was skinned, and then the skin was used as a gift to the Levites to be a part of their compensation, one might say, for performing the service of the tabernacle. They would sometimes wear them as clothing, sometimes they would weave them into tents or whatever it is, but like it took on a very functional purpose that had nothing to do with reconciliation or atonement or anything like that. Nope. So for someone to kind of read into that moment and say, okay, this is clearly or definitely or whatever a sacrifice, they have to ignore the two singular features of sacrifice that are absent. They also have to posit an extra layer of significance to the hide and the garment that was not present later on. And then they further have to account for the fact that they're looking at a death having occurred when that isn't A, the point of sacrifice, and B, isn't even present in the text. And so just all those things piled on top of another, it makes it a completely untenable proposition to me.
Right. So if this isn't about sacrifice, which there's absolutely zero evidence for it and a whole lot of evidence against it, so we should probably toss that idea, or at least set it off to the side in the this is probably not helpful category. So Spencer and Phil, then are as the Protestants in the room, are we saying that Protestant theology then saying that God is some sort of taxidermist to give Adam and Eve a new outfit? Eve needed new clothes, so all of a sudden now a hypothetical animal death is needed because they need new outfits. Is that what we're saying in the Protestant theology?
Okay, can I just jump quickly in? The idea that it was a sacrifice, I did a lot of research on it, and I couldn't find anything earlier than 1706, Matthew Henry's commentary. Like, that was the earliest I could find.
Wow.
So it's even Calvin didn't make that illusion. So Calvin said something, hang on, I've got a quote. He was still pretty negative about it. He said, God therefore designed that our first parents should, in such a dress, behold their own vileness, just as they had before seen it in their nudity, and should thus be reminded of their sin. So that's John Calvin. It's a reminder that how vile humanity was. But he didn't see garments of sin as a sacrifice. It's not until 1706 in the
Yeah.
Matthew Henry commentary. That's the earliest I could find. If someone can find
Yeah.
earlier than that, I would love to know. But that's the first
Yeah.
time it kind of appears.
So, all
Well,
right.
and Matthew Henry's commentary is pretty easily accessible online. Like if you just go to like Bible Gateway or one of the other, kind of free, widely accessible things, and you're just an ordinary, probably Protestant person who just wants to understand the Bible better, honest, curious, open-minded, you say, okay, what do the scholars say? And then you click on the link and it takes you to Matthew Henry's commentary and you go, oh, okay, this is a sacrifice. All right. And then you walk away and you go about your day. So I don't blame anyone for feeling and thinking that way, because it's what the ordinary everyday person has access to. But the hope is that people would just do what I try to do in my podcast, which is to like really zoom in and examine the text and see what the text itself actually says, not what you've always been told the text says. So,
or go older and read the church fathers.
And I have plenty of things to say about that. I have a raft of quotes there. So
yes.
Yes.
So, which is exactly where we're going. So, if God isn't Michael Kors re-wardrobing people for the new season of life, like, I'm sorry, I just, now that view seems so absurd to me. So I just have to laugh at it a little bit. So my apologies if that offends anybody, but I held that view for a long time myself. So now I kind of poke fun at it because it doesn't hold up anymore. So if that of the three major threads of what these garments of skin are, and we can set that one off to the side, we've got two other options left, because this, I think, is one of those beauties of the way it's written, and Moses is writing these stories down, is left ambiguous on purpose. And we'll get into the Hebrew of that in a minute. But leaning into this patristic thread of, going back to how has the church looked at this throughout history, and consistently you see two kind of veins of thought here. And this is where, okay, and I want to just, as a side note, again, because it's my channel and I can, when you learn how to read the church fathers, you listen to them like it's the total of what they're saying is like a symphony. So everybody's going to have their own thoughts on this, and what is the guidance of the church and what is personal opinion are two different things. So you have to learn how to separate what is the stuff that we're supposed to listen to that it influences our theology, and what is their personal opinion. And there is, because this is ambiguous, there is room in orthodoxy, makes room for differences of opinion, as long as it doesn't point you in the wrong direction. And those ones that point you in the wrong direction are the ones we throw out. So there being differences of opinion here is not a big deal for the Orthodox. So we're going to hold things in tension a little bit and be like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. There's elements of both, maybe. So.
And I'm just going to normalize the Protestant anxiety about that as someone who still lives in a Protestant communion. Like, this is, I know many people who are my friends and family and everything would hear that and go, well, but what does it really say? Because we've been taught so much about like sola scriptura, what the Bible actually says, or go back to the Bible. And then, of course, that's layered in with things like the perspicuity of Scripture and the sufficiency of Scripture. And so I just want to, say I hear you for any of my Protestant brethren who hear talk of patristics and church fathers, and the text might be ambiguous and it might have multiple layers of meaning, and just say, I see that anxiety. I understand that. I still feel it sometimes. Just pause it for now and listen with an open mind.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Spencer. So the two tracks I'm gonna call, one of them is the Athanasian track, because it kind of gets popular, like it gets more press and more attention with Athanasius. It's older than Athanasius, but he's the one that kind of really puts it forward, that kind of becomes the earlier, what if you, for Protestants, the earlier view. And then the other one is the pedagogical thread, which kind of develops a little bit later, but they're not in conflict. So let's just say none of these are opposing binary. We're not, Orthodoxy doesn't think in binary either ors. So this is kind of a both and idea. So let's talk about this a little bit. The Athanasius thread is that no animal died at all. No death of an animal was required. An animal didn't die. All of the happy little animals got to continue going on being happy little animals. And the God who made all the animals and man and woman out of the dirt reached down, grabbed a little bit more dirt, and fashioned some skins out of the dirt. And then that's what was given to Adam and Eve. So for all of our vegan friends, this is a very vegan friendly view. No animal was harmed in the recording of this opinion of the garments of skin. Okay. And then there's the pedagogical thread that says, basically, like, an animal died as an example so that Adam and Eve could comprehend what death was, because they had no experience with death. They didn't know what it was. And that God reached down in the dirt and fashioned some skins out of the dirt and gave those to Adam and Eve, because we are from the dirt. And so we were given more dirt as to build up a layer of protection. So that view, even though there was an animal death, it wasn't to sacrifice. It wasn't for taxidermy purposes. It was to see, like, you know, I told you if you eat of the fruit of this tree, you would die. And, you know, instead of taking that literally as I swallow this and have instantly dropped dead, it's, you know, here is what the consequences of your choice is going to be. Eventually, like this poor animal just stopped living, you're going to eventually stop living. That's the consequence. But it isn't, we got to, you know, move away from God said you're going to die. It's not instant. Very few, there's a lot in scripture that doesn't happen instantly. There's a lot of time in between as the passing of stories. So, but those are two very different ways to come at it.
And to be clear, not God showing them this is what death
Right.
is as like a threat, you know,
Right.
some sort of passive aggressive, this is going to happen to you too.
Right.
But because, you know, in the patristic tradition, they saw the death and mortality as being given as a mercy, as a way to keep them from being crystallized eternally in their state of sinfulness.
Right.
And so as both as a way of like limiting in time and space, you know, the damage they could do to God's creation and themselves, but then also as a way to like kind of, by remembering their own mortality, to press ever closer into repentance and into, you know, releasing, because they are going to leave this life, to release this life. So yeah.
Right. And then
Saint Irenaeus kind of
Yeah.
he gets there eventually,
Mhm.
but he says that the fig leaves were itchy and scratchy and irritating. And so God didn't want them to wear them forever. So he made more suitable tunics for them.
Right. So
I don't know. I have some merino wool. I don't know about that. I don't know if he really made it all that much better, but then again, I don't have merino wool underwear, so you know.
Well,
maybe
you have not lived.
apparently. Apparently.
Okay, moving on. Moving on.
Now let me show you.
I'm too
Oh my
tired for
goodness.
this.
Oh my goodness.
I'm beyond the scope. Okay.
All right.
Let's go.
So to get back to the scope, I promise. It's funny because I was talking with someone once, a fellow Protestant, about this a while back, and they actually asked the exact same question that you kind of rhetorically posed a while back, Amber, saying, well, where did it come from? Like, what are you talking about? There was no death. Like, of course, it's a skin of an animal. How do you get a skin of an animal without death? And something I pointed out to them, and you can tell me if this is wildly, overreading things, but the Hebrew verb there for God fashioned or made the garments of skin is the same thing that just got used in Genesis 1 for God creating or fashioning the cosmos. And so, like, if a traditional, Protestant person wants to affirm that God made, creation ex nihilo, out of nothing, then it wouldn't be, or at a minimum, out of chaotic matter, if you want to go the John Walton route. But at a minimum, we have God taking something that is not already a formed thing and forming it. And so, and the verbs there reflect the exact same action. And so I don't see any reason why we would entail necessity in the, 2 chapters after we say, no, absolutely not.
Yeah, we've had two chapters of God creating, not only ex nihilo, but taking the creation that he made ex nihilo with dirt and making a whole bunch more creation in it. So
Yes,
he
right.
creates the that's the whole 6 days of creation. He creates a space and he fills the space. So he takes the stuff he created space with and creates the stuff that fills the space, because he takes the dirt that he created to make the space, and it uses that to create the animals and people to fill the space with. So why God suddenly can't just do the same thing with that same dirt and make skins out of it is one of those, like, brain hijack cognitive dissonance things, like, wherever that gets hijacked in the history of Protestant theology. I think Phil kind of has tracked that down a little bit with the sacrifice idea, but the fact that God, all of a sudden in Genesis 20, when Adam names his wife Life, God loses the ability to create out of ex nihilo or out of his own creation is a weird idea to me. So we're just going to assume that God stays God and stays consistent throughout the entire Bible. So if he decides he wants to take some dirt and make Eve a new outfit out of it, that works as well. So, but going back to the Hebrew there too, Spencer, it's really interesting, because what are these garments then? If they're not made out of a dead animal, what are these things? God makes them a garment of skin, which is like probably like a tunic thing. We don't know. It wasn't described what he made them. We don't know exactly what it looks like, but that word there can shift between two different meanings. Okay, so Hebrew has these words that are like, they're called gutturals, and they don't have an exact sound. They have a little bit of a sound, but not a lot sound, but they're placeholders is what they are. And it is, this is one of those words that starts with a guttural, and depending on which guttural you put there, it changes the meaning of the word. So the word is just pronounced or, okay? But if you start that with an aleph, that the word means light. But if you start it with an ain, that word means skin. So you go from, and this is where this patristic idea comes from. And Gary Anderson talks about this a lot in that book, Genesis of Perfection, in his chapter on the garments of skin, that before they are in garments of Ohr, starting with an aleph, garments of light. That is that innocence, that unnecessary boundaried, that allows us to interact with the essences of God, because we have that pure innocence that is untainted, that doesn't need boundaries with God and with each other. But when the fall happens, and if you change that and put the ayin on the front, and it becomes Ohr, then it becomes an actual skin. So are we saying that God gives them a body? No, that's not what we're saying. We're not like spirit beings of, pixie light fairies, and then we get physical human bodies with bones and like that kind of thing. That's Gnostic ideas, and we're not going to do that. So but the idea and the significance of this pin of this and the wordplay here goes from, because we are created with priestly roles. They are put in the garden with jobs. So they are to care for the things of God, which is what a priest does. So we go from these garments of light, which are the priestly roles that we're given, that are completely uninhibited and completely innocent, to having the weight on them of the consequences of their choices. And so now we have not got that pure innocence that we had before, right? This is, Spencer, I'm going to let you riff on this for a minute.
Mhm.
This is the ontological change that brings us into introducing this idea where they are shamed, but it's not, their shame is supposed to bring around their repentance, but we get it in this idea and in the fall, and brings in with this idea of inherited guilt and the Calvinistic understanding of ancestral sin, and that somehow the semen of Adam has made all of us morally corrupt to the point where we are, this is where this worm theology, I hate this. This is really bad stuff. This worm theology, all of this comes from this place. So we are not talking about the fact this is nowhere in the plain reading of the text and in the church history for a very long time. This is not the idea. We're talking about a change of ontology. So Spencer, I know you love to talk about this. So talk to us about the change of ontology here, and what does this actually mean?
Yeah. So ontology, for anyone who doesn't, who isn't familiar with the term, is just basically kind of like the science of being, basically the study of being. So what that means is their mode of being.
It's not the study of the trees in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Ontology. Yes. Oh my gosh. So yeah, the idea is that, like, before, in our very good state, aiming toward perfection, working toward the fullness that God designed for us to be, the eventual Christ likeness that God designed for us to be. We were in a particular mode of being, a particular ontological state that was lighter. And I don't mean that in a literal sense, in the sense of like, oh, we just floated around. I mean that in the sense that, like, that we were unencumbered, kind of like when Hebrews talks about, let us, strip off the sin that so easily entangles and run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So it's the same kind of idea that, like, the Adam and Eve could run unencumbered. They could run, again, not say literally per se, but that
I hate that word.
Yes.
I hate that word.
That's probably yeah. There's a lot of there's a lot of equivocation we're going to be doing here.
Yes, just a quick question for clarification, Spencer, because I know in my old Protestant self is I can still hear that a little bit, and
This is good.
So first of all, are you saying that all of a sudden Adam and Eve gained a whole lot of weight, so they're not light anymore? Now we've gained, like, the garments of skin is like they just gained 20 pounds for no apparent reason, or like in this idea of this, like it's going from, instead of this idea with Paul and this, like, you can hear that and you're just like, okay, well, like, we're not supposed to walk around with backpacks on all the time. We're just supposed to take them off and walk around that way. Are we talking more about, like, the beauty of a 3-year-old's wonder and innocence at how beautiful something like a flower is in front of them?
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes. Thank you for centering me on the much more practical and psychological rather than the theological. Thank you, Amber. And that's exactly it. So, like, in my counseling practice, for example, when I work with people who have experienced shame, we'll just go with shame since the text talks about shame and you brought that up. Shame is incredibly heavy. it weighs you down. It like, and shame could be externally imposed shame, like, someone says you shouldn't be doing this, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't realize that was bad, and then you feel shame. Or it could just be internally imposed shame of like, ooh, I realized I hurt someone, and or I've done something wrong and I should not have, and it doesn't align with who I want to be, and so we feel the shame. Like it burdens you. And actually, in the style of therapy I use, IFS, one of the things we talk about doing very often in the context of healing is unburdening. Because these parts of us are viewed as carrying burdens, as carrying weights, like in the world, because of being in the world, because of our choices, because of other people's choices, etc. So I think that, like, just from a very practical, boots on the ground perspective, I think most people will understand that psychological experience of feeling weighed down, of feeling heavy, of feeling like you want to stand up and stand tall and stand strong and stand straight, but you can't. And like, literally, as a somatic psychotherapist, this is something I see in session all the time, and I call it out for people. I'm like, I was just talking with a client just two days ago, because as we were talking about something, I could just see like their shoulders pull in and their body kind of curl in. And with other people, I see like just they just kind of sink into the chair, or there's just like a ton of nervous energy that just has nowhere to go. And so those are very psychological descriptors of the ontological reality, because ultimately that psychological event is either something purely in our head, just describing our own mental headspace that kind of manifests in our body. There's the nominalist perspective. Or that psychological event is describing real, actual things that occur in the world, that have actual reality and structures of the world. And that's where we get into the ontological shift. And I take the second one because I am a realist, not a nominalist. So.
Right. And I want to also, for clarification too, Spencer, because the way that shame, I think, has become a very tainted and complicated word in our
Very
modern
much.
context.
Yes.
So shame in and of itself is a neutral, and it can be used to bring us to where it causes us to get to a point of repentance where we realize something is wrong and I need to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can bring that about. But this is where, I want you to kind of bring this in here, because I think a lot of us in this story, because of the baggage of inherited guilt and ancestral sin, turned this, what should have been a turning around moment, inject toxic shame into it. So talk to us about that.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question as well before you answer?
Please.
Because I have had this question, and I'm hoping maybe you can finally give me a satisfactory answer. The negativity around shame, especially coming from like your profession, is saying often that shame is bad and all shame. I think even my wife, who is a psych nurse, kind of just has this underlying impression that all shame is always bad.
Yes.
But then you read the Bible and you see God shaming people to correct their actions. And that is really, really confusing. So
yes,
help me out.
Okay. So I'm going to come at this first from the modern perspective and then from the biblical perspective. So looking at it from a psychological and counseling perspective, Brene Brown is pretty much the preeminent researcher on shame that we have, currently. And she delineates between guilt and shame. So guilt is about behavior. It's about actions. It's the feeling we feel when we have messed up or done something wrong. Shame, however, is about identity. So whereas guilt is about behavior, shame is about identity. And so if guilt says, I messed up, shame says, I am messed up. If guilt says, I have done bad, shame says, I am bad. And that is, I think, a lot of the driver behind why there's this kind of modern impulse to kind of push away shame and to not go into shame, because there is very much, and I would say in many ways, a godly um, kind of instinct that wants to look at humans and say humans are good, because we were created good and we were created with the image of God, and that is not lost in the fall. That is darkened. That is, has some difficulty and veiled in the fall, but it is not lost. And so there is a strong impulse to avoid saying, to avoid shaming someone, like body shaming or, or some other kind of shaming, mom shaming or whatever, because then it goes beyond just simply you made a mistake with your behavior, and it goes into you are a bad person. There's something wrong deeply down in your identity with you. The problem is that words don't just mean things, especially across time and culture. They carry meaning within their culture and their usage and their context. And so that's what shame means for us in our culture. In the ancient culture, they had an honor shame culture. And so for them, honor was about it wasn't even like self-esteem or anything like that. It was just about like being saving face within the community, being having a good name, a good reputation, being someone who had high standing or good standing within the community, because it was, for one, a collectivist culture, but then also because they lived and died by their community, because they were much less self-sufficient and much more us sufficient. And so to honor someone meant to give them great status within the community. To shame them meant to take away that status within the community, to expose them to, as well as Paul says about the powers and principalities in Colossians 2, to expose them to public shame. So the idea there is when Paul's talking about that, he's not saying that God was like, nah, 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 in some kind of like really, childish sort of demeaning way. He was just saying to the entire world, the entire cosmic community, these people have been overthrown from their high position of authority and power, or not these people, these entities, these spirits have been overthrown from their position of high authority and power and status, and you no longer need to worship them because of that. You are no longer beholden to them. They have no claim on you because of that. So that's what shaming means in the biblical sense, is taking away that communal standing within a covenant community in particular, especially in this context.
And I think there's a lot of, because, in with that, in that whole shame narrative, a lot of the Protestant theology I grew up with, and talking about this story and these garments of skin, has a lot of shame in the toxic sense attached to it. Like God is shaming them because he gives them these garments, covering them up, and then he casts them out. Well, and there's this idea.
That's what Phil read from Calvin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It is not, this is not God saying, you're gross, you can't be around me anymore, I'm throwing you away. This is not at all, but that's the implication a lot of that other theology can take you to, and the damage that does to people who are listening to that, thinking that God doesn't love me because I'm not good enough. Like that's not at all what's, and this is where, like, if you finish out chapter 3, verse 22, then the Lord said, behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. Now lest he put out his hand and take of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the garden of pleasure to cultivate the ground from which he was taken. So he cast out Adam and made him dwell opposite of the garden of pleasure, and stationed the cherubim and the fiery sword, which turns every way to guard the way to the tree of life. So this is not God throws them away because they're gross and disgusting and he can't stand them anymore. This is not a mark of shame that permanently is toxic. That means that we have no kind of like, that's perfect, Roddy. It's not a scarlet letter. If you've read that book, that book is shocking, like how people
Yeah.
used to treat
Yeah.
each other like
Yeah.
that. But this
Yeah.
is the garments of skin are not a scarlet letter. And I was reading out of this one of the Septuagints that I have, because I love the way that they talk about that, because they lost their they call it the garden of pleasure there, because as priests their job was to care for the Garden of Eden and maintain that relationship with God as part of their maturing process. And they have lost that, the thing that they were created for. They lost that beauty of that job dedicated to God, in relationship to God. They lost their access to that by their own choice. And so they have to get a special covering. And this is where I get to nerd out my thesis a little bit. And we're going to jump to the tabernacle, because there's a garment covering, a skin covering on the tabernacle that does two things. First of all, it protects the interior, because they're in the desert, they're wandering around, there's sandstorms, there's heat, there's sun. The stuff in the tabernacle, all that gold, all that imagery, all those candles, all that bread, that, the Ark of the Covenant needs protecting from the environment. So one of the functions of those garments is internal protection. Then you've
And
got the other
that word
layer.
doesn't show up again until the tabernacle. I think
Yeah.
Nope,
the word skin
you're
is like
correct.
silent in the Bible until it's used.
You
It's
are
the same
correct.
word that's used for the
Yep.
tabernacle.
Yep.
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 And then the other function that this does, and this is where we get really fun and nerdy, because there's that weird blue layer that everybody's fighting about. What the heck is this? Some people say it's porpoise skin. Some people say it's like platypus. Like there's all kinds of weird theories about what this blue layer is. And I think it's left in, ambiguous again on purpose, because we don't always have to know all the gritty details of the lab report. It's not, the Bible's not a lab report. So, but what this layer does is, because when you see in the rest of the narrative of Scripture, whenever people walk into the encountering the Shekinah or the Doxa, the glory of God, if you're not prepared for that, book of Leviticus, that bad things happen to you, right? Aaron's sons bring a strange fire into the tabernacle, and they're struck dead with that. They burned up with their own fire. Uzzah tries to steady the ark, and he touches it to keep it from falling off the cart. Good intention, not prepared, struck dead immediately. The sons of Beth-Shemesh, they look at the ark the wrong way, and the 7 leaders try to open the lid. All 50,047 struck dead instantly. Like, messing with the glory of God is never a good idea. Isaiah 6, Isaiah doesn't even get past the threshold, and he's on his face. Lord, have mercy on me. I should be dead. Like, this is so. The tabernacle is protecting the camp and the Israelites from the glory of God. So it's containing God's glory in a way that if somebody doesn't walk too close to the fence, they drop dead because they got too close to the glory of God in a way that they weren't supposed to. So, and this is a repeat of the pattern that we see in the garments that Adam and Eve are given. And they need protection. Their soul needs protecting, and they need protection from the environment that isn't the environment they were created for. So they're sent into the wilderness. They need internal protection and they need external protection, which now turns into, Spencer, let's talk about boundaries and why we need them.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's very true, because so in my podcast, when I talked about the word naked, because that's kind of the opposite of garments of skin is nakedness. And if garments of skin is connected to shame, then nakedness is connected to lack of shame. That I talked about how that is not just about like a literal, lack of clothing. Whether it is, and again, there's that word again, sorry, whether it is a lack of clothing or not, the real symbolism behind nakedness is vulnerability. I mean, I don't want to get too graphic here, but let's just be honest. Like, being naked around another person is vulnerable, is incredibly vulnerable, is very tender, is very sensitive. Like, there's all kinds of questions about, is this okay? Is this safe? Can I trust this person? Am I going to be good enough? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so being out there in the world without those protections feels naked. And honestly, that's one of the things, like when I work with trauma, there is both a I'm going to say, I'm just going to say it because I can't think of a better word, a literal and a symbolic level to that.
Literal.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Start using the mute button that I have.
I know. Or like little sound effects. Yeah.
Spencer just loves to poke. It's fun.
I know. I do. But in all seriousness, though, like when I work with people who have experienced trauma, like all of their defense mechanisms, like that's why we call them defense mechanisms. They're there for protection. That's one of the things trauma does. It wires us for protection rather than connection. And so we hold people at arm's length because we don't know if we can trust them. We immediately we are always scanning for danger, hyper vigilance, all the time. Like all those kind of things are ways in which we are reducing our vulnerability to threat and danger, because the world we have grown up in and lived in, whether it's through childhood or through adult experiences or whatever, has taught our nervous system that the world is dangerous and people are unsafe and we have to protect. And so we have these kind of soul level, garments, so to speak, that are our bubble of safety, are, that we project out there in the world that tries to keep us safe. And without that, it is desperately, desperately scary and frightening. Like when I work with people, I tell them all the time, like, this is what I'm saying is simple, like, do X, but it is not easy ever, because just stepping into a space that previously felt unsafe or continues in some ways to feel unsafe causes our entire nervous system to go haywire, screaming alarm bell threat. And every nerve in our body is saying, protect, 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 protect. And if we don't put up those walls to protect, it feels like we're walking in naked. It literally does in so many ways. And so that's one of the reasons why boundaries become so important, is because we're in a world, and I know I've been describing this in the context of trauma, but really, just like I tell people all the time, we all have experienced trauma. There's lowercase t trauma and there's capital T trauma. And we may not all have experienced the capital T trauma, but living in a fallen world, living outside the garden, is traumatic. Like, that's exactly why God wanted us to stay there. And why he wanted Adam and Eve to bring Eden out into the rest of the world, to rule and subdue it, because it is trauma inducing to be out there. And so just being out there in the world needs protection, not just because, not necessarily because we have, been hurt and harmed in really traumatic ways, but just because people are selfish and the world is dangerous. And I don't mean that like in a, okay, now you got to look for everything kind of way, but in a, you have to take care of yourself, because otherwise you will get burned. And so you have to be
as a
protective.
child, like, I probably am giving myself away a little bit too much by nodding too much, but I've got my own attachment issues and I struggle with relationships, and I often just want to run away.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
We're even good things like love and connection and belonging
Yeah.
feel unsafe. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yep, because you're too vulnerable.
Exactly.
It just came to me before when you were talking about shame being like an absence of status, maybe. Is there a relationship between glory, which is like weightiness, and shame?
Yes. It's like the inverse of glory.
Right, okay, that makes sense. Yep.
Right.
Yes. But not in the inverse in the sense of like lightness.
Mm.
Although the fascinating fact is that the word, one of the primary Hebrew words for forgiveness that is used in the context of sacrifices is to lift up, to make
Mhm.
Yeah,
light.
yeah, yeah. Yep,
Mhm.
yep.
And so, like when we talk about burdening and shaming, with the forgiveness that's being offered in the sacrificial system in particular, well, or not in the sacrificial system in particular, forgiveness is being offered by God. Let's just put it that way, like in
Yeah.
Exodus 34, which is his primary self-revelation. The forgiveness is being offered by God is a lifting up where he takes our shame, takes the weight of our, it's almost like his glory, his heaviness lifts up our heaviness and
Mm.
throws it in the ocean, carries it away as far as the east is from the west, like Psalm 103 says, all those things. So yes, I think there's definitely a Hebrew like conceptual word play going, or concept play, because kavod
Mhm.
and nasa are not related linguistically, but there is a conceptual link there.
Mm.
So yes.
Yeah, we would call that a thematic link, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I want to go back a little bit to what you said, Spencer, because I'm still kind of thinking about this and translating all of the trauma and like professionally type jargony things and explaining that you're doing, which I love. It's fantastic, and I always learn a ton. But sometimes I'm like, okay, I need to, for me, translate that into something that makes a little bit more sense.
Mhm.
And in biblical imagery and thematically, the wilderness is associated with chaos. It is the
Yes.
opposite of Eden,
Yeah.
which is order
Order. Mhm.
and predictability and innocence and safety. So this is where again the tabernacle is so helpful, and we need those two. It does the dual function because we need the outer protection, not just because now we've got the fallen world and you can fall and break stuff and things are dangerous and animals eat animals and stuff. Like there's that level of needing protection from the exterior, but our interior also needs protection. So we are
Mhm.
our weight of our wounding that we have from being fallen needs
Mhm.
protection from the chaos outside
Mhm.
of us. So
Yes.
we need that internal layer because my chaos is going to touch your chaos. My
Yes.
wounds are going to touch your wounds. And
Right.
without that barrier there, it's going to wound you even more
Right.
because touching wounds hurts. So
Yeah.
we need
Hurt people
protection.
hurt people.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. See, this is something that I'm just honestly just thinking about off the top of my head right now. So I'm acknowledging it as speculative, but I think it could be helpful. You mentioned earlier that the garments around or not the garments, but the skins, which is the same
Mhm.
word, around the tabernacle were designed to enclose,
Mhm.
circumscribe is probably a better way to say it. You know, the
Yeah.
glory of God, the the kavod, so to speak, was in there, and it's interesting when you talk about humans containing the image of God, being the image of God. It's
Mhm.
almost like the garments of skin are us being walking tabernacles with skins around us containing or circumscribing the
Mhm.
image, the glory of God within us. And so when you say things like the mess inside us, that's exactly the way that I see it, is like I think there could be a connection there in the sense of like the boundaries are not just to protect us from other people, they're also to protect other people from us.
Mhm.
Because just like just like the skins around the tabernacle protected the camp from the glory of God breaking out and causing destruction all over the place. Only in that case it was because it was pure holiness and pure goodness. For us, it's more like we have our God-given abilities to heal or wound, like with our words, like
Mhm.
James talks about. Our tongue is a tool, and it is a tool given to us by God. It is in many ways the part of the glory of God in us. But we can
Yep.
use that glory either to wound or to heal. And so those garments of skin in many ways kind of protect everybody, and our boundaries to protect everybody
Yep.
from us.
Right. Which I want to go back to the image of God, because this gets into pushing back against this idea of of ancestral sin and inherited guilt, because in the Eastern view, we look at this more. You hear like inherit ancestral sin, but what that let me translate that for you a little bit from what I understand. Okay, this is just from what I understand as just a lay person. So I'm not a priest. So if you have a question, go find one and ask him. That is more of an idea of inherited, like multi-generational trauma. So Adam and Eve were the first domino of multi-generational trauma that has just been passed down from generation to generation, which gets reinterpreted with each different culture, context, language, family dynamic, and individual person damage that just keeps getting compounded and just keeps rolling on and rolling on and rolling on until the final eschaton, and we're finally out of this perpetual cycle of inherited ancestral trauma that happened in the break and the fall. So it's not this idea that because the image of God is never removed. The fall doesn't remove the image of God. It doesn't diminish it. It doesn't take it away. It doesn't downgrade it. It doesn't split it in some way. It doesn't minimize it, and you don't have to go very far until you get to the genealogy of Noah. And Seth is recorded as inheriting the full image of God from Adam. So this is not one of those, like, if anybody who remembers older generations of photocopy machines, like, you could only put images on photocopy machines and copy them so many times until you had to go back and use the original, because every time it would get so diluted, eventually you couldn't see what that image is anymore, because copies of copies of copies of copies were horrible, right? So this is not what's happening to the image of God. We are still the full inheritors of the image of God given to Adam, with that breath of the Ruach. We still have that same full image. So if you're going to say that, if we're going to say that it is a moral failure that brings this corrosive taint and total depravity to humans, because we are full image bearers of God, that is an active, an image always goes back to its source. So if you're going to say that, you have now got a problem saying God is morally corrupt and that God is just, that taints God himself. So I cannot say that and not say that that's at best heresy and probably blasphemy to say that God is morally corrupt. Like, that just is not a thing. Like, that just, no.
Particularly when you take into account the Chalcedonian Christology, when you talk about Jesus being fully human,
yep,
and fully God and united without confusion or all those things, then if you say that humanity in itself is somehow morally blameworthy, tainted, whatever, then you have to say either Christ took that on, or you have to pull and this is a literal move that Calvin did, go the Nestorian route and say, well, actually, there were two subjects. There was a human subject and a divine subject, or something like that. And so either way, like, that's the serious problem we encounter when we run into this kind of theology. Yes.
And that also, like you said, you end up in several ditches there. Nestorianism probably being the nicest of the ditches that you're running into, because you've got, you have to say that taints the incarnation, and it makes Christ a tainted sacrifice that he couldn't even offer himself as a sacrifice because he's tainted. This is why Leviticus matters. Like, this is important.
Yes. Well, I mean, and people throughout history have realized this. That was the origin of the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception.
Yep.
Like, the idea there was that it had to be the Immaculate, or else the union of the Trinity would be ruptured in some way.
I'm going to clarify that really quickly, Spencer, for people who don't like.
Oh, sorry.
Because that's a Catholic thing, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
Catholics believe because the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos, conceived and bore Christ, she had to be without sin and perfect herself.
Hmm.
So she was immaculately conceived by the Holy Spirit, not being as some sort of perfect human herself, to be able to carry the incarnation, to be able to carry Christ without her moral tainting
Hmm.
the incarnation.
Hmm.
So that's a
Yeah.
Catholic thing. The Orthodox reject
Correct.
that. That's
Yes.
ridiculous. That's not a
Yes.
thing.
And that's a reaction to
Mhm.
Augustine and
Yeah.
the
Yes.
transference
Yes.
of guilt. And
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, there's no more practical way in which that ancestral, guilt, or sorry, ancestral sin versus inherited guilt model works out than in the difference between the East and the West in terms of how they view the Mother of God, the Theotokos. Is that, the East says they don't believe that there is this inherited guilt, this moral corruption to human nature. Because now they still believe in original sin, but just not in the Augustinian type of inherited guilt model. And I would
Right.
even argue that to a large degree, that's a misreading of Augustine from
Yes.
Calvin. But nevertheless, I'll
Mhm.
just set that aside. The whole point,
Beyond the scope.
yeah, beyond the scope. The whole point being that in the East, they don't have that problem, because that's not how they view human nature being affected. And so therefore they can say that Mary was a human in all the senses that we are human, and because of that, Jesus was a human in all the senses that we are human. So anyway.
Right. So yeah. So we're gonna leave the Catholics out of this. So
Yeah.
because we don't have time to get into
Yes.
all of that. But I think that all of this, if we boil all this down, like, okay, so if the garments of skin are an ontological change that makes us need protection,
Hmm.
it is a consequence. So yes, everybody who's a free willer is going to have to say, yep, they used their free will and now here we are. And that is, so if no animals died in the filming of this story, and we don't have God being a taxidermist and creating a new fall wardrobe for Adam and Eve, like, it's just kind of going back, thinking through everything that we've gone through in this whole thing. I think the takeaway and what we want, like what I want out of for people to come away with this from, is a couple things, like that this is something that I hope is a healing conversation for people, because of the way that the text doesn't land on necessitating death and sacrifice, and a point that nobody brought up that I forgot about until just right now, because if that was an animal that was sacrificed, that should have fixed it and they could have gone back in the garden. Like, why wasn't that a thing? Also, because that's what sacrifices did. They cleansed the space and allowed people back into God's presence. Didn't happen again. So there's another one. But I think this whole looking at at these garments of skin, and when you look at the tabernacle and you look at the progression of covering in the Old Testament, because there's a lot of covering stories and a lot of covering language, those are all meant for protection in one form or another. So this is God's first step in the cry of, we messed up. God is giving us protection.
Yeah.
Is giving us mercy. God is giving Adam and Eve mercy before he has to send them out of his presence. It's because we've chosen the long way around now, and here we are. We need protection. And how do we do that? We do that with boundaries. We do that with protection from the external and protection of the internal. And we do that with this idea that God is always gracious and loving. Mm-hmm. Everything is eventually is a blessing. It might not feel like it at the time, but it's all works out to be. Paul talks about this. Everything comes to the completion for the good. That's a terrible paraphrase, but that's the best I can do looking at the Septuagint. So, but I'm an Old Testament scholar for a reason here. But this whole idea of everything works together. So this is as we're on the upswing, these garments get redeemed in the incarnation, in the death, burial, and resurrection. The unassumed is unhealed. So God assumes our humanity by fully inhabiting humanness, which involves this ontological shift, and it shifts us back.
Yeah.
And so in this process that we call theosis, that all y'all Protestants call sanctification, justification, glorification, something, I forget them all anymore. I don't remember anymore. We call it theosis. In the process of becoming Christ-like, to the perfection of that process, we get to go back to our garments of light. So those that ontology for us eventually is going to shift back, where we go back to this unprotected, unbarriered, complete, innocent, vertical relationship with God and horizontal relationship with each other. Like, what a wonderful day when I have to, don't worry that Spencer's going to say literally and poke at me for for something, and I have to put my boundaries up and just go, okay, I know Spencer's going to do that, so I have to be prepared. Like, I'm sorry, Spencer, I just love to poke
It's okay.
at you guys. To not be able to have to do those things, because we will be restored back into our perfected innocence that won't need barriers and boundaries anymore, because we're back to that innocence that is able for full connection. Because, and Spencer, I kind of really want you to talk about this, because we covered the question that I gave you beforehand. We covered that already. So I want you to talk about this, going back to this place of innocence where we all long for full connection and full vulnerability, but we cannot right now. And what does that hope give to people to be? We're going to go back to that state of complete, full, unguarded vulnerability and innocence with each other and with God. What does that do for our healing and theology?
Oh my gosh, yes. So I'm going to go back to a personal story again, and I'm going to use my daughter again. And it is that, like I said, she is just a firecracker and is, completely like way out there, but in the best possible ways. Like, one of the things that I've discovered is she loves hard. Like, she had a BFF last year who was, I was a little bit concerned initially, thinking that she was like being taken advantage of through gifts and various other things. And then also, very often my daughter would just like say things that were just on her mind and heart. They just pop out of her. And I was so scared for her when that was happening. I was like, I don't want you to be hurt. Like, this is it. I was feeling the heaviness, the weight of the fallen world that I have lived in. And it's like, I've seen what that's and felt what that looks like when people go out into the world and they just open themselves up wide open. They get hurt, they get burned. And, kids are cruel, or at least they can be at times. Or even if they aren't intentionally cruel, at least they do things that hurt us. Let's put it that way. It's probably the best way to say that. And so I've tried to kind of walk this very fine line that I still don't know I do well, between, I don't want her to lose that joy and that freedom and that delight and that just abandon. And frankly, there have been several times where negative consequences have happened because of things she said and done. And they just roll right off her. She's just like, oh, all right, let's go. And she moves on to the next thing. And I'm like, in many ways, that is a gift and a blessing. And it's like, I don't want to lose that. But I know that being in the world outside of Eden, outside of the garden, I should say, that there will become a day where the heaviness will settle down and it will sink in. And I don't want to rush that day, and I don't want to push that day, but I also want to protect her from that day. But I don't want to do it before she needs it. Like, it's such a delicate balance in trying to walk. And I think that is a good analogy to the way that I do therapy with my clients is, I think so. Like I said before, I use a style of therapy called IFS, or internal family systems, and the basic idea behind IFS is that basically we contain multitudes. That we ourselves are not just a single entity that has one set of desires, beliefs, whatever. That we are in many ways many made up of many parts, a mosaic of many parts. And so it's like, I have a part of me that wants to, that is my dad part. I have a part of me that wants this, that wants you know, so like in an everyday situation, I got a job offer. A part of me wants to take it because that part of me likes money or likes to have more money. Another part of me doesn't, because that part of me wants to have the stability in of being at home and staying at home more, or working from home, or whatever it is. And so we kind of find ourselves in this conflict between parts of us. And the whole goal of IFS is to integrate all those parts into a cohesive whole, with the center being the self, which is seen as being something that is connected to all of our parts, but is not, is not burdened by the world in the same way that parts are burdened. And like I said, that is the language we use, is burdens. And I would say from a Christian perspective, that very much is exactly the way that we see the picture of us in Genesis, and also in practical experience living in the world. We come into the world very much like my daughter, you know, innocent and free and unburdened, and not weighed down by all of the things of the world and the experiences of life and everything else. And we still have many parts of us. Like my daughter has many parts of her. I see it all the time. But they're not necessarily burdened parts. They're just free parts. They're just parts that just kind of activate naturally in different circumstances, and they kind of do their own thing. But then at some point, the world teaches us we have to protect. The world is dangerous. The world is scary. People are unsafe. God is unsafe, whatever it is. And those parts of us learn that lesson, true or untrue or whatever, it doesn't matter. They learn the lesson, and they develop defense mechanisms. They develop ways of being in the world. And that's our, the burdens that parts of us carry. And those become aspects of our personality. Like if we're a particularly anxious or worried kind of person, it's because at some point a part of us learned the lesson that you have to do this to be safe, to be out there in the world. And so again, those become parts of our like garments of skin, essentially. Things that we do that we put on top of our garments of skin is actually probably more appropriate to say. Things that we do to protect us from other people in the world. But they become burdens. They weigh us down, and they take away that freedom. And so there's a shift there, because if you walk in with a Western mindset to that model, then you look at that, and I've seen this a lot in conversations I've had with Christians about IFS. They go, okay, so what's the self you keep talking about? Like, aren't we sinful deep down at our core? Isn't that the way that humans are? What do you mean that, are you denying original sin? Or what do you mean like there's some part of us that's not touched by, or not touched, not damaged in a significant sense by sin? And I say, well, okay, you were created by God, right? God only creates good, right? Did that go away? What happened to that? And that's one of the reasons why in IFS many times they equate the self and the image of God, or the spirit, or something to that effect, where we look at the core of us. If we, who are the problem, who is the mess, try to fix the mess that is us, that's a vicious circle. You can't do anything about that. And I'm sure many Protestants would say, yes, that is exactly the point, Spencer. You're not supposed to be able to do anything. It's supposed to all be God. But to me, that ignores the reality of the Bible that says that we work out our own salvation in fear and trembling because it is God who works within us. So it's that synergeo, the synergism of God working, stepping in to our broken, fragmented selves with many parts, burdened with all kinds of different things. And he takes that first step, and then we have to step toward him. We have to, cooperate. That's the synergism with him in that work of healing and rescuing and salvation. So what I try to do with people in the counseling setting is to be able to say, let's connect to the core of you, the core of you that is created by God, that was designed by him to be good, and has been burdened by a lot, not has been burdened, but has witnessed a lot of burdening happening in other parts of you because of the world that you lived in. And how can you, at your core, connect with those parts of you that have been burdened and help those parts of you be unburdened? Not because you are God and you are going to save yourself, but because that is the energy of God working in you to will and to work for his good pleasure.
Right.
And so it shifts the mindset away from this like inborn evil, like I am evil and wicked deep down at my core. And it takes it to, actually, God created me good, and the devil has not won in trying to destroy that. And so from that space, I can bring out the energies of God into my own healing, and from that space to then heal the world.
Right.
And that's why we use the shorthand language of no bad parts, because these parts were not created bad. They become burdened, but they are not bad.
I want to pursue that a little bit more, but I know Phil has to run, so I want to give Phil a chance to just kind of contribute your thoughts to, if we pull sacrifice and death and all of that out of this whole image of the garments of skin, and looking into conversations with our atonement friends, how does that change that conversation, Phil?
Yeah. Before that, I think everyone watching should go and read the story of Joseph with this lens, because it's incredible. Like, think about the times when Joseph is clothed with a garment, and then when he leaves his garment behind and runs away in kind of innocence and unburdening himself. Like, that is super, super fascinating. And I'm sure there's so many connections there that I haven't noticed. But and then the whole thing that he does in Egypt is to bring like an Eden environment into the domain of Egypt, and that becomes like an Eden environment. He's like the priest, but the garment image just keeps popping up, and it's very, very fascinating.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a lot of depth in there that I haven't noticed myself.
I want to do a whole episode on Joseph himself. That would be like amazing. So, but anyway, Phil, how does this help us in the atonement conversations?
It's a lot of just leaving, for me as a Protestant, a lot of leaving that baggage out of the story, I think, and just reading the narrative on the narrative's own terms. So, and I'm sure you guys will get there when you talk about, I've lost the word, the Incarnation. Because basically that's what atonement is. Yeah, it's about, and like we said at the very beginning, the goal was always for humanity to be united in Christ and to be united with Christ. And we're taking the long way around, but that's always the goal. Like, we were always created to be united in Christ, and to, theosis is where we're headed. And so what God is doing what God did for humanity in the garden, I think, is a way of preparing us for the incarnation and our true self,
Mhm.
who we will become and who we will realize and actualize ourself as we find our identity in Christ. And I think that is the true meaning of atonement. Is
Mhm.
I like the word restoration, because you can
Mhm.
Mm,
restore something that is kind of tainted
mm.
or broken. I know a lot of people don't like the language of broken, but I think I'm broken. Not irreparably broken, but there's lots of stuff about me that I would like to remove or
Yeah,
change that I can't do by myself. Um,
yeah.
so I know in myself that I need restoration at some point, but ultimately our restoration is to be more like Christ. And
Mhm,
as we are more in Christ and we grow into Him, we are being restored.
mhm.
And that I think that's atonement, is being reunited and connected with
Yeah,
our Creator.
yeah. Actually, do you mind, Phil? I don't know if
Mm,
you have time to, but I want to take that point about you like feeling like you're broken. Can I speak into it given what I
mm,
said?
mm, mm.
Okay. So
Yep.
even that language there of I
Mhm.
feel like I am broken. You'll notice the equivocation about the I there. There's an I that is able to see the brokenness and an I that feels broken.
Mhm,
And those are kind of different things. Um, or at least those are things that are different perspectives on the same event that are in some degree of tension. And so even there, it's almost like I would ask the question, and I do this to my clients, like, so which part of you or what aspect of you realizes that you need that help? And isn't that a good thing? Isn't that good?
mm,
And so
mm,
actually, and so like one of the bigger shifts that I do when I work with people who have experienced trauma is I encourage them to use parts language instead of saying I am dot dot dot. And now we get into toxic shame is, saying I am broken, for example. I say, you know what? A part of me really feels broken.
Mhm.
A part of
mm,
me feels the weight of XYZ in the world. And that part of me isn't sure that it can ever be put back together again. Which is acknowledging the real reality of sin. I think sometimes people think that, without inherited guilt and original sin, oh my gosh, then, you're not really acknowledging sin. No, we really are. Like you're
Sin's
facing up
bigger.
to,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's more than just a moral failure. It is like
yeah,
everything about us and our creation and how we experience the
yeah,
world that isn't as God, you know, isn't as God intended or wants it to be as an ideal.
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. And
And this
so
is where
go ahead,
I
yeah,
would
Amber.
I would push back on both of you with the broken language, because I used to be, my Protestant brain thought that way. But
Mm,
now coming into the Orthodoxy and the Orthodox Church, and we're talking about understanding that instead of talking about this, the idea of sin as this, violating a legal checklist that we have to defend ourselves against,
Mm,
that these are actually, because sin is here's God's standard, and I didn't get there. I
mhm,
missed it. And
yeah.
every time I do that, and I inherited this ancestral trauma, I am wounded. My soul is wounded.
Mm,
My person is wounded. I am injured. I am sick. I need care. I think that using the words of woundedness instead of brokenness, because broken
mm,
means I have to be like, that's a like that things that are broken, the imagery that we take with us is it's never completely put back together. You can glue it back
right.
together and it can function, but it's not the restored, but when you're healed from wounds,
Hmm.
that's a restoring back to where it belongs. And so I think the Eastern view of
Yeah.
pulling it
Yeah.
into the language of the hospital and woundedness and sickness, because I don't get blamed for getting sick. I just need
Right.
treatment and I need
mm,
Right.
healing. I need restored, because that's what healing is restoring. So that would just be my pushback on the two of you. To
That's a helpful
laying the
reframe,
advice.
yeah. But
Yeah.
as a technician, I fix broken things all the time, so I like that. Nothing's ever really broken. It just means I've got to do my job better to fix a
Yeah.
broken coffee machine.
Well, and doing your job is exactly the point. So, like, going back to that healing and hospital model, you know, yes, as a patient, there are certain conditions that may take my will out of the equation, that I may, need to be put into a coma for a period of time by somebody else to heal me. And so, absolutely, like, I don't want to make it sound as if we are trying to erase God's activity and action in doing this, or like go, full Pelagian or even semi-Pelagian about this. Like, it's to say that, yes, even in those cases where God has to, like, put you into a deep sleep to loop back around to, Adam and Abraham and everybody else, to be able to take you apart and put you back together again. In order to do that, we still, once we wake up, have to cooperate, have to work with. And this is where the inherited guilt really rubber hits the road. And especially like in the context of like IFS and counseling and healing and those kind of things, is which aspect of you, what I is the one working with the healing. And that thing has to be good, or at least it has to have goodness in it. It has to be working with the energies of God, because demons don't heal. Demons steal, kill, and destroy. And so if there is any aspect of you that recognizes God wants to heal, this is a real physician who is trying to heal me, and I need to follow his instructions so that I will, be healed. If there's any part of us that recognizes that is God in us. And therefore, we are not totally depraved. We are not unable to do anything toward our own healing. We have to work with the healer. So, and that's what I try to do in my counseling work.
Right, which I think in if you're looking at the incest and hang on, the inherited guilt thing, and if I and that just fell out of my head. Hang on a second. But basically, my point is, like, if I'm not irreparably broken from the beginning, there are aspects. So inherited, here's where I was going. Inherited guilt puts you in the mindset where if I try to, like it. So it's, again, speaking from me and my own experience and history of coming out of the Protestant theology that I came out of, and that view, like I'm refusing the medicine and the treatment from the physician because I don't feel like I'm worthy and I don't deserve it, because I'm broken and I'm evil and I'm bad.
Yep.
That's not. It's not. That's not what it is. Instead, coming from now where I am and the way that the Orthodox use it, it's just like, and in my experience in both the parishes, because I go to two parishes for reasons, but in both of them in very different ways, but the approach is, I see your person and we love you anyway, even if you're a hot mess of a whole lot of wounds and illnesses that needs treated. We see you and the person, that you are valuable and you are loved here. Like, I can't tell you for me what it was like. We had this lovely woman in our parish, older lady, and it wasn't very long after I had started becoming consistently showing up. Every time I went, she'd grab me, give me a huge hug, and say, "I see you, I love you, I'm so glad you're here." And that to me was just absolutely unbelievable. And that's the approach of, what my experience has been. And, churches are full of fallen people, so stuff happens. But in general, that's the Orthodox approach. We see you, the whole you, and now we know, we're going to give you things to do. We don't wait until you're all better before we let you do stuff. We're going to give you jobs, because that's part of asceticism and the whole view of giving you meaning, and not giving you meaning, but giving you meaningful tasks to feel valuable. that is also healing. You don't have to wait until you do the performance of I've all better, look at me, I'm perfect now because, Jesus did the magic thing in the closet. Like, no, we're gonna love you in your hot mess, and that giving you a task to do and finding things that are meaningful and digging your gifts out from under the wounds so we can let you use those while you heal. Because if we waited till everybody, so Spencer, if we wait till everybody's perfectly healed and perfectly normal for them to get to do stuff, how long are we going to let people sit around? Like, really, seriously.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I love what you said, that lady. I've heard
Mhm.
that story from you before, but that's basically what God is doing. He's saying, I see
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
And then, so I'm not going to leave you alone. It's another thing that Protestants like to say, like God at that point, like they couldn't be in God's presence
Yeah.
because
He
God
turned
and
his
sin
face away
can't
from
meet.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But God, and even you see that with Cain, like Cain did something really bad, and then God shows up and he has a conversation with him. And then he protects him. And I think that's what God is doing in the garden. He's showing up, he's noting that they've fallen away from the ideal. They've fallen away from his glory in some sense, but he's protecting them and he's staying with them.
So
Yep.
Troy asks a good question here too. I'm going to pull this up. Is sin a curable disease or is it terminal in the hands of the great physician? So,
Can I check out and can I say goodbye before
Yes.
you get into
All
it?
right.
I've got to go and do some things.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. I always love having you on. So I'll find an excuse to bring you back at some point after you're done moving and recover from the stress and strain of all of that. So,
Yep. Thank you. And we'll be able to see what my new recording space looks like. I don't know what it looks like. Yeah.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
I actually have time tomorrow to put your package in the mail. But I need your new address. So message that to me so I can send
I'll give
it
you
to
my work one. Yep.
Okay, that one. So then we can do the premiering of our surprise that we've been working on forever.
So good.
It's going to be so awesome. That's good. All right. Thank you, Phil, again.
Okay.
And Lord have mercy, I'm praying for you. That's for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, we need it. Bye-bye. Love you guys.
Thank you.
All right. So, Spencer, is sin an incurable disease? Or is it not?
Well, I only have about 7 minutes before I got to go pick up the ubiquitous daughter who has already made several appearances.
It's 2:20 already. I was
Yes.
Okay.
But anyway, so like Phil was talking about earlier about and like we were talking about with the tabernacle, the garments of skin or like the covering of skin around there was to protect the glory of God from the incursion of impurities, but then also to protect the people from the glory of God because they themselves are impure. And so I think the principle there is that when impurity and holiness, because impurity is associated with death and holiness is associated with life. When life and death come into contact, life wins. And what that means in many contexts is that it gets burned away. That's where we see the image very, very often of a refiner's fire or those kinds of images in the prophets talking about the holiness of God consuming, God is a consuming fire in Hebrews and Deuteronomy, all those things. It's not like a wrathful deity. It's just saying God burns away all the things that is not part of his creation, that is our creation. We have created ourselves in some ways. And so when Troy asks, is sin a curable disease or terminal? I mean, I kind of want to go, yes.
Yeah, that was actually my answer. There's a lot of curable diseases that you die from if you don't get treatment. So ultimately, God, the herring of Hades, we just finished Pascha, sin and death have been defeated. But if you have a curable disease and you don't get treatment for it, you will die of that. So, yes.
And this is where I loop back around to the incarnation and the incarnation being plan A.
Yes.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
that.
Is that
Yes.
it is curable when
Mhm.
human nature is
Mhm.
united to the divine nature. When
Right.
the one who has life in himself, or the one who has been given life in himself by the only one who has life in himself, as John would say, when Christ, who has life in himself, goes into our state of dependent life and infuses our nature with his own immortality and incorruptibility and all those things, then it destroys, just like that, holiness comes into contact with
Mhm.
impurity. It destroys impurity. It does that. And so that's why when John in his epistle starts talking about atonement, he uses it in this cosmic language to say that the sin of the entire world has been atoned for, has been um, has been taken care of, because the life of heaven
Mhm.
has now entered the human creature, and the human
Yes.
creature is the hinge point of the entire cosmos. Just like with Adam's fall, Adam's sin
Mhm.
affected the whole cosmos, was subjected to futility in Romans 8. The second Adam, by having life in himself, entering into that Adamic state,
Mhm.
purified that Adamic state, and from there purified the whole cosmos.
Mhm.
So all of that to say,
Yep.
that's why I have this kind of quote unquote optimistic view of human nature. I know some people kind of think of it that way, and I say quote unquote because I believe in the resurrection.
Yep.
Because I believe that the death does not get the final word. And that's
Right.
that's why I take the approach I do in counseling.
This was fun. This was a lot of fun. So, Spencer, what is coming up on Trauma Informed Church Kid? I've been
Well,
waiting for an episode because
I know. I
I
was going to
love
say
them.
my people who are tracking are probably going, "What the heck is wrong with this guy?" Because I've only done a handful of guest appearances and a live stream on Good Friday, and I've kind of taken almost like a whole month out, and it was just because life got very busy
Mhm.
and very full, and like I said in the green room ahead of time, like I was getting behind, and
Mhm.
I just needed to pause and take a step back. But finally, things are back on track. Planning on releasing another episode on Monday, and it will be an episode with Phil, our good friend who was just here. And so, and in there, we're going to be talking about sacrifices, and then, and that is the lead in to the next series of episodes we're going to have. I'm going to have a couple on purity, talking about purity culture. And also several on sacrifices and what they are and what they are not. So that's going to be very informative. And I also have a couple of things I want to make sure people hang on to and really watch out for. Is I'm getting some really good interviews lined up, and I can't say all the names yet, but I mean, like, I am getting super excited. Like, there's some really cool interviews coming up. So
Awesome. I can't wait to see those, because those are always my happy Monday.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
happy Monday things.
Yeah.
Although I don't, if that's going to change now, because your podcasts were usually recovery from a morning of classes of Protestant nonsense. So that's going to change that. So I won't have to have that as a
Yeah.
coping mechanism anymore. Anyway,
Coming
and
back soon.
well, I've told myself I'm taking a year off. We'll see. I'm going to get to about the end of July and be seriously reconsidering my life choices about that at that point. But I'm really going to take a year off and then dive back in and do my doctorate, I think. But now that my stuff is back in line and my schedule's freeing up and I'm almost done, I've got some good stuff coming up here. I'm going to do a series on the Incarnation, so we're going to dig into that big time.
Yeah.
Troy's going to come. We're going to talk about the
Yay.
Incarnation. We're going to do some really fun stuff. I'm going to do an episode on synergia, and just kind of tackling that word and demystifying that word a little bit, because you get some pretty interesting takes on how people interpret what that word is and how that works.
Mhm.
And then I've also got a series that I'm working on about liturgy and the history of liturgy, starting in Genesis 1 and just kind of doing this progression. What is it? Is it built into creation? Is it something we need to be afraid of? So I will probably be pinging you for an episode on the somatic experience of participatory worship, Spencer. So I know I'm like, I didn't even have to finish the question of who do I talk to about this one, because I know exactly who to go to for that. So there's some really good stuff. And then I also am going to be having time. So my plan is June 1st, I'm actually going to get my Substack launched. I created one and I was like, I'm going to do this and all the stuff I don't put in my thesis. And then I realized I didn't even have time to do my thesis. So I'm just like, I had to table that. So that will be coming out. We're going to start that with a really, really cool, the first one I'm planning on talking about Micah 2:13 and the breaker and talking about that. And we're going to dig in. It's going to be awesome. And then all the fun stuff I had to leave out of my thesis and some other, that's a place I'm going to put some more of the spicier things that I don't say on my channel. We'll put some more of the controversial stuff over there. We're going to get into, I'm planning to get myself into good trouble with everybody, Protestants and Orthodox as well. So thank you, Spencer. It's always a joy to have you. Always love when you drop by, and we'll definitely see you back. I'm sure I'm also suspecting that you may appear in the Incarnation series in there somewhere. So
we'll see. Thank you very much.
All right. And everybody, I hope you have a beautiful and a wonderful day. And looking forward to getting back into the rhythm of contents and great discussions and just having a whole lot of fun, because there is so much beautiful enchantment and mystery in scripture and tradition that we really just need to take time to admire. So we're going to spend a lot more time waking up to the mystery around here. All right. Be blessed.